Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren kicked off the Chicago Bears head coaching search with their end-of-season press conference on Tuesday, and in doing so, they failed to give us much clear communication and confidence as to why this time they'll get it right and the results will be different.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get started with $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we check in on what we learned from Ryan Poles' press conference, followed by some comments from George McCaskey and Kevin Warren to wrap up the season and kick off the offseason, mainly focusing here on the head coaching search that is now underway. We'll kind of check in on this idea of organizational alignment and making sure that Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren and George McCaskey are on the same page and working in the same direction, and how it didn't necessarily clear a ton of that up. We'll also hear from Ryan Poles about what he learned from the Matt Eberflus process to make us think that maybe things could be different this time around. But also, I think we'll try and find some reasons for hope and optimism here, and maybe some things that it does sound like Ryan Poles is learning from and getting right and taking things in a better direction here. But I think when Ryan Poles speaks, and especially then when Kevin Warren and George McCaskey speak, which is not a super common appearance, we want them to come out and steady the ship here a little bit and give us some confidence and some faith in the direction of the leadership at the very top of the organization. And I didn't feel like Tuesday's press conference accomplished that. I thought Ryan Poles came out initially seeming kind of nervous, but eventually as he got into the press conference a bit more, 10, 15 minutes in, he kind of found some of his footing and had a little bit more of that leadership back. But then Kevin Warren and George McCaskey really didn't do him a ton of favors afterward. We wanted to see that there's a clear, unified message and direction here from this leadership group, and neither George nor Kevin was able to properly back up Ryan Poles in a way that felt, that inspired confidence, let's say. Because one of the big questions that needed to be addressed that still has not been formally addressed is Ryan Poles' contract. When he initially became general manager, he signed a contract. That contract is set to expire at the end of 2025, this current calendar year. He will be the end of his initial general manager contract. Candidates like Ben Johnson and others have expressed a desire to go to an organization where there is alignment between management and the head coach. Alignment can mean a lot of different things, and the Bears tried to clarify some level of what that alignment looks like, but they did not clarify whether that alignment will or will not mean length of contract, because Ben Johnson or whatever head coach comes in here will sign a new contract that will be, at least 4 years, maybe 5, maybe even 6 years is kind of the top of the food chain there for head coaches. And they might look and say, well, okay, I've got a long contract, but the guy who hired me only has 1 year left on his deal. Is he going to be here for a while, or are we going to get 1 year into this and then my boss is going to change and now this isn't the job that I thought I wanted coming in here, and maybe I don't want to come here if there's not that sort of clear structure and direction at the top. Ryan Poles was asked, hey, have you signed a contract extension? Ryan Poles said, and he's been consistent on this, he said from the very beginning, I'm not going to ever comment on my own personal contract status. That's between me and the ownership, and he's done that throughout this process. So I don't blame Ryan Poles for dodging the question in that way, because at least he has been consistent about that. But then George McCaskey was asked, hey, do you need to give your GM an extension so that it lines up with the head coach's contract? And George McCaskey said that hasn't really been a concern in any candidate I've ever interviewed. That doesn't come up in the process. Usually they want the job regardless, and they just want to be here. So that's not a real concern of ours, as whether the GM's contract is aligned with the head coaches, which is not him saying, no, we're not giving Ryan Poles a contract extension, but it's not putting the problem away. And that's the problem for us. Because Kevin Warren is asked, like, hey, are you committed to Ryan Poles long term? And Kevin Warren says, well, long term can mean a lot of different things. I mean, 1 year can be long term. 2025 is a long year. There's a lot we need to accomplish this year. Like, he has faith in Ryan Poles. He believes in Ryan Poles, but wouldn't commit clearly and confidently to answer the question, right? And so that's what we're left with. We're left with dancing around what Ryan Poles' contract status is or isn't. And I think there's two aspects about this that bother me. One is, like, at the very least, like, you can just give him a contract extension and align it with the coach. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that hard. Like, you either believe in Ryan Poles or you don't. So you kept him. You're letting him pick the head coach. So he should be the guy who gets to go for as long as that head coach is here. Ryan Poles should get to be here because he is the guy picking him. Why would you let Ryan Poles pick a coach and then maybe fire Ryan Poles a year from now and change your mind and bring in a new GM? Like, you want the GM to pick the head coach and have those two people genuinely be tied together. But the other aspect of this is like, okay, even if you don't believe that and you say, well, we still need to see more from Ryan Poles or whatever, like, you have to have your messaging together. You're a professional football franchise. You have public relations staff. Everyone has to say the same thing and answer that question in a uniform way. You know what? Even if you're all going to dodge it, I don't like that, but okay, but dodge it in the same way. Have a clear message. Stay on message, on point. Like, Kevin Warren is already enough of a politician the way he answers his questions. He sounds like a politician. It's a lot of platitudes and just not really answering the question. He when you listen to Kevin Warren talk, he talks like he's the mayor of the Chicago Bears. And anyway, but you got to all have the same message. Like, any good politician should know that. You stay on message here. They allow themselves to kind of wander off and say other stuff and then kind of come back to try and say not answering the question. Like, if you're not going to answer the question, at least make it seem like you're all on the same page about how you're not answering the question. And one guy says, oh, it's not a big deal. We don't worry about that. The other guy says, oh, well, we're just, we're handling it. Don't worry. Like, they're not even giving you the same excuse or giving you the same sort of escape from the answer there. It just doesn't feel directionally sound there. Like, everyone is on the same page. And then you get into like how they're going through this process. Okay, George McCaskey was very clear that the Bears are a vertical structure organization. Head coach reports to GM. GM reports to team president. Team president reports to ownership, and no one circumvents that. Head coach won't come in and report to Kevin Warren. Head coach won't come in and report to George McCaskey. They'll report to Poles. Poles reports to Warren. Warren reports to McCaskey. Okay, that's some sort of organizational alignment here, but it still concerns me quite a bit the number of people then that are involved in this head coaching hiring process, because Ryan Poles said it's a committee that does these interviews, and it's a wide-ranging committee that includes guys like Kevin Warren, of course, George McCaskey, Director of Player Personnel Jeff King, Director of Business Administration Matt Feinstein, and then their Human Resources Director or whatever, Liz Geist. I don't know her exact title there. So you've got Ryan Poles is a football guy, Jeff King is a football guy, and then Kevin Warren is like a half football guy, but then McCaskey as not a football guy, Matt Feinstein as a not a football guy, Liz Geist as not a football guy. You might be noticing Ian Cunningham is missing from that list. Ryan Poles says Ian Cunningham is likely going to be interviewing for general manager positions on other teams, so he doesn't want to detract from that. But if Cunningham doesn't get a GM job, then he'll be a part of the interview committee there. But instead, Jeff King is kind of taking his spot there. But I don't like the number of non-football people involved in that committee. Certainly, they're not all going to get even say. It's not like, okay, there's 6 people and everyone gets 1 vote and everyone's votes are created equally. Like, Ryan Poles, they've been trying to be clear that Ryan Poles is picking the head coach. The committee will help inform that decision and be a part and be a part of the thought process, but it is ultimately Ryan Poles' decision, and that helps. But again, I'm just not left feeling like, wow, the Bears really have a clear plan here and they've really learned from the past mistakes. It feels like we're kind of doing the same thing again that they did when they hired Matt Eberflus, they did when they hired Matt Nagy, they did when they hired John Fox, although I guess this time we don't have Bill Polian or Ernie Accorsi consulting and leading the search. So maybe that's one small sign of progress. Really what we need to see is that Ryan Poles learned some lessons from last time, because he's sort of the key decision maker in this. So we'll hear from Poles himself about what went wrong with Eberflus and how he's trying to apply that to the next head coach next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, from the biggest upsets to the game-winning drives, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's an extra $200 added into your account, win or lose. You just bet $5 on any of these playoff games or any of your favorite sports. There's college sports, basketball, hockey, tennis, soccer, boxing, the combat sports, you name it, a $5 bet on any of those. And you're going to get $200 in bonus bets regardless of what happens with that $5 bet. The FanDuel app even gives you everything you need for live bets and same game parlays as well. So there's plenty of different ways you can play that $5 bet and get your bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with those $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. Because if you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats, like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. So maybe you're looking at Saquon Barkley's touchdowns or Jordan Love's passing yards, if he's even able to go. I mean, it's a lot of fun to play on PrizePicks, and it helps you have a tie into some of these playoff games or any of your other favorite sports, even if your favorite teams aren't playing in them. Right now, we have a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. If you download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL, you're going to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Whether that lineup hits or not, you're getting $50 instantly when you use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL with PrizePicks. Run your game. Things may not be all that different this time around for George McCaskey and the other non-football people involved in the Chicago Bears head coaching search. They're still, unfortunately, doing their thing. But I think our hope can then lie in that Kevin Warren wasn't involved in the previous head coaching search, so that's a new voice and a new perspective in there. Whether that's a helpful, positive, informative voice or one that detracts from the process, we can only speculate on the outside and form our own personal opinions there. I think mine has been trending in a negative direction the more Kevin Warren's been around, but we don't know. We'll see how the process goes. He hasn't gotten to do this before with the Bears, so we get to give him he gets a chance, right? I mean, we don't have to trust him implicitly, but we can at least wait and see if he does a bad job before we assume he's going to do a bad job there. And then in Ryan Poles, who, yes, obviously failed in the Eberflus decision, but has a chance to have learned something from this and grow. And because he ultimately gets the final say here, he is picking the head coach. It is on him to show us that he's not going to make the same mistake again, and that he's going to make the correct decision for this team and for this franchise. And I'm not telling you that you should have complete faith in Ryan Poles, but I think it's worth giving him a chance to sort of hear him out, to say, what are you learning? What are you doing differently this time? What are you seeing in this coaching search? And in particular, I wanted to pay attention to how Ryan Poles looks back at the Matt Eberflus situation to sort of make sure he's learning some of the right lessons from there. So I want to play this answer from Ryan Poles' press conference here, because there was a theme for Poles here that he mentioned in his opening statement and came back to in his questions about what went wrong and what he's trying to take away from that. And I'll say it on the front end here, and then you can hear Poles' answer. He comes back to this idea that this season they got away a little bit from what they had done the first couple of years when it comes to how they think about the team and the process of going about their business, that they got too focused on the results and not focused enough on the process. The idea here is that this season, expectations were higher. Everyone was talking about playoffs, right? We heard it from the from OTAs, we're going to be the number one defense in football. We're going to be a top 5 defense. Everyone's talking about the Bears having a top 5 defense all offseason. Top 5 defense and playoffs. Those are all results. Those are all outcomes. Those are all at the end. That's all after the hard work. Everyone was talking too much about what we're going to be instead of the process, what we're doing now and how exactly we're going to get there. There was too much focus on, the glory at the end of the rainbow and not enough focus on what the work we have to do every single day to get there. And I think it was sort of this idea, the takeaway I got from Poles here is that like they were getting too far ahead of themselves, and that's something he puts on Matt Eberflus. Like, to me, essentially it was like the team couldn't handle what little success they thought they were having. You know what I mean? That when they were bad, it was easier for Eberflus to hold the team together. When they started thinking they were good, they stopped paying attention to detail and trying as hard and got too ahead of themselves instead of having to really earn their way there. And that, to me, feels like the distinction here that Ryan Poles is trying to communicate. So here's how he's asked about, the chemistry in the locker room falling apart and how this idea of process over results needed to be the focus.
Ryan, over the summer, you guys talked about the culture here, the leadership here a lot, about what you had. How did it get from that to where we're talking about details and lack of accountability? What do you think kind of fractured that?
Yeah, there's a couple things there. When we talk about culture, and I've talked about this, I strongly believe culture is people. You all spend time with them. There's a really good locker room in there with really good guys. I think there's some foundational things that you have to address from the beginning to kind of hold the standard throughout the entire year. I believe when you go through struggle, some of those things get difficult, right? Guys are struggling with just being down and losing games. And I think that's some of the things that we saw. Any team needs like a certain standard and certain measurements of how we're going to do things. Because at some point in the season, you're going to have adversity and your house is going to be shaken and your foundation's tested. And at that point, you got to go look at the root cause. Did we do everything we were supposed to in terms of detailing everything we needed to? Because if you didn't, it's a little bit off. And like I said, I think we looked at the outcome and winning more than the process in doing those things. Then those things show up and bubble up. Especially, we were put in a lot of situations where, we're a couple yards away from a kick line. We were right there in a lot of situations. And I think some of the competitive poise popped up in terms of doing what we need to do and being disciplined to get over the hump.
The thing that I want to make sure we give Ryan Poles credit for, that I think he's been fairly consistent with throughout his tenure at general manager, is after the fact, being able to identify a mistake and what went wrong with it. Now, that doesn't mean he is guaranteed to not make more mistakes in the future or similar mistakes, and he has made plenty of mistakes along the way, but I think about he was willing to say, yeah, the Claypool trade that was not good. He was willing to cut Nate Davis midseason and say, yeah, no good. And he's recognizing the things that went wrong with Matt Eberflus. That does account for something as opposed to missing it entirely, right? Like, he does understand what the problem was. Now, whether understanding what the problem was will empower him and prevent him from making another mistake in the future is a different leap. But at least there's an understanding of a real understanding of what the problem was. Not just, we didn't win enough games, but like, here's why. Here's how we got there. Here's what I missed. Here's what I didn't see back then that I should have been able to see. And not everybody can recognize their own mistakes in that way. So I do think that counts for something, even if it doesn't count for everything. Now, then there's this idea of like, okay, why couldn't you see that 12 months ago when you retained Matt Eberflus? And that's where I think I come back to, like, it all changed this offseason, right? It changed with the expectations. It changed with Caleb Williams, and it changed in all these ways. And I think it then informs Ryan Poles that this time he has to have a head coach who's ready for that. And that's something else that Ryan Poles talked about, that I think if we're looking for reasons to find some optimism or hope, I'm not saying you should come away from this feeling super optimistic or hopeful, but like, it doesn't have to be zero hope and zero optimism. But I think there are some signs here of Ryan Poles recognizing the right things now in what he needs to do it as a head coach that shows some ability to learn from Matt Eberflus. And we'll kind of get a sense of what that looks like and how much we can try and hold on to that throughout this process next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money has helped me find subscriptions that I forgot about, that I've been paying for months and didn't realize that a few bucks a month were coming out of my account. You don't really notice the number going down by $5 over the course of 30 days here and there. But with the Rocket Money app, it makes it super easy because they track, hey, here are all the reoccurring spending that you see in your bank account. I hooked up my bank account and my credit card to the Rocket Money app, and it is super, super easy to use and super, super helpful for me as well. They make it really easy to track it all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finance, because Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel those unwanted subscriptions, but also monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's your spending habits or financial goals you want to hit. Like I really like having it. It keeps me on my toes. It flags any large transactions to make sure that, hey, did you mean to spend this much money at that restaurant that night? Yeah, I did. I got a little carried away. But I'm glad that Rocket Money was there to just make sure it wasn't a fraudulent charge. It's one of the most helpful apps I have on my phone. And I've had the Rocket Money app on my phone before they came on to the Locked On Podcast Network here. So happy to have them with us on board. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on. That's ROCKETMONEY.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. So I'm trying to find ways to be a little bit more positive about this, because it's really easy to listen to George McCaskey and Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles to some extent and come away kind of defeated and deflated and say, all right, here we go again. They're going to go through another sham head coaching process and pick another bad coach. And 2 or 3 years from now, they're going to fire that coach and fire Ryan Poles. And then McCaskey's going to get back up there and say the same things again. And then we're going to go through the whole process. It's easy to just say, ho hum, nothing's changing. Why should I care? Why should I even pay attention to this coaching search? And I do think a lot of that is valid. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to tell you, no, they're going to get it right this time. I can't sit here and confidently say that, but I'm looking for reasons as to say, okay, well, why could this time be different? What could we try and attach some of our hope to that's actually legitimate and not just, fantasy, hoping that somehow, the blind squirrel finds the nut and that the broken clock breaks twice or is right twice or whatever cliches you want to do. I mean, that's part of this, is that eventually they're just going to happen to get it right. They'll luck into getting it right. They'll stumble into the lap of Ben Johnson and he'll save the franchise, right? That's always something you can hold on to. But I think Ryan Poles is really approaching this from a smarter vantage point this time. Again, smarter doesn't mean perfect. Smarter doesn't mean he's going to get it right for sure. But he could just as easily come out and shown no signs of growth or progress and been like, oh crap, we didn't learn anything in this. And there's another answer from Ryan Poles that I wanted to play for you, that to pair with the one we heard last time about process over results, where I think that was an astute observation that is bigger than just, oh yeah, the offensive line, we need to do more on the offensive line, or there wasn't enough accountability. Like, yeah, that's part of it, but it's bigger than that. And I think he recognized a more broad strokes, like philosophical leadership, organizational type of problem there. But I also liked his answer in terms of how he's going about this searching process. There was one question I'm not going to play for you here, but about how do you weigh the offensive-minded head coach who has never been a head coach before, versus maybe the more CEO leader type head coach who's not such an offensive specialty. And he gave a good answer where he said basically, listen, every coach we're going to interview here needs to have really good leadership and communication skills. And every coach we're going to interview here needs to have a great plan for the offense and for the quarterback. So whether you're Ben Johnson as an offensive coordinator or Mike Vrabel as a head coach who's not an offensive coordinator, you need to have a really good plan for the quarterback. And you need to have a really good plan for leadership and communication. And so at that point, if you have a good plan for both, it doesn't matter whether you're the OC or not, or whether you're the CEO head coach or not. As long as you have a good plan for both, that's what's more important. And I think that's astute. And we'll take a whole podcast episode here in the coming days and weeks to talk more about, does it have to be an offensive coordinator? I think the answer is no, but it's easier if it's an offensive coordinator, but it doesn't have to be an offensive coordinator. I want to parse that out more in depth in the future there, but I think that's sort of where I land on that ideally it's an offensive coordinator, but some people make it seem like if you don't hire an OC, you're making the wrong choice, and I don't think that's true either here. But the other Ryan Poles answer along the same lines, he was asked about, hiring someone who has been a head coach before and has that experience versus hiring a first-time head coach like Matt Eberflus, and what Ryan Poles needs to see to feel comfortable with somebody who hasn't been a head coach before. And I think he had a wise answer here about how they view that.
Historically, this franchise hires assistant coaches and makes them head coaches. I think only one in the last 100 years has been a head coach before. What is the value you put on experience at the head coaching level versus how you project an assistant to be, given that Matt Eberflus was an assistant and maybe some of the traits you thought would translate did not?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you look at that, good coaches come from different places, different backgrounds. How are you supplementing your blind spots, your void? So if you're a first-time head coach, what can we put in place for you to help support you? What do the coordinators look like? Are they former head coaches? You have an advisor that's a head coach that's at your right side to pick up some of the blind spots to say, hey, you might want to take care of this. This could turn into something later, or I think you might be missing here. So how are you supporting some of those blind spots if you are a first-time coach? If you have been a head coach before, yeah, there's a lot of value because some of the new things, like you've already experienced those, you've been around it, and you have kind of the playbook and the blueprint on how to counter things when they go away from you, or when you have success, how do you make sure that everyone stays humble and they continue to work and get better? That
answer to me brings me back to the Matt Eberflus hiring initially back in 2022, where it's like he builds out a coaching staff there with a bunch of his coaches from Indianapolis on defense, and then like a whole new staff of offensive coaches that he hadn't really worked with before. And it didn't feel like they had that kind of, leadership and wisdom there to have experience that might identify your blind spots there and might set the foundation right. Like it was kind of just rolling off of whatever Matt Eberflus had done as a defensive coordinator in Indianapolis. And there was a lot of trying to pull that all together. And of course, then, they kind of get off the wrong foot with the Getsy offense and everything. And then Alan Williams proves to be a problematic hiring at the very least. And the running backs coach gets fired for HR stuff. Like, I think that's some of the stuff Ryan Poles is talking about there when it comes to like having experience with you in the room and how those coordinator choices and other mentors and stuff can help make that process better. Like for Eberflus's credit, we saw in Hard Knocks, like Nick Saban came into the building and tried to warn them about expectations, but that didn't stop them. That didn't stop the problem. So, it can be more than just having the right mentor. It's got to be built into the structure. And it feels to me like Ryan Poles is talking about looking for the right things. There's something we can hold on to there. Again, talking about looking for the right things is not the same as saying he's going to find all the right things and get the right head coach, but gosh, can we just hold on to something here? Can we find something positive to say, yes, all right, we have hope that they're interviewing all the good candidates that we wanted them to interview, plus a bunch of candidates we don't want them to interview, but like they're interviewing the Lions guys, they're interviewing the OCs, the young offensive coordinator guys, they're interviewing Vrabel, they're interviewing a wide variety of people. They're talking to the right people, and Poles is talking like he's learned some things. Let's hold on to that and hope for the best. Maybe that's all we can do at this point in the process. Any and all Bears head coaching search updates we get throughout the week, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen once again for your next opportunity to bear down.